Ladies and gentlemen, a very warm welcome to all of you. My name's Brad Mackay, and I'm the Deputy Principal here at St. Andrews. And a very warm welcome to the Carnegie lecture being delivered by Professor Patricia Hill-Collins, entitled Reimagining Community, Intersectionality, and Participatory Democracy. Before I introduce Professor Collins, let me first say a few words about the Carnegie lecture series. So the Andrew Carnegie Lecture Series was launched in 2014, so we're now in the 10th year, and thanks to generous support from the Carnegie Corporation in New York, both as part of its centenary celebrations and to complement our own 600th anniversary. The person after whom the lecture series is named, Andrew Carnegie, was born right here in Fife, but he emigrated with his family to Pennsylvania in 1848 when he was 12. After accumulating vast wealth through the Carnegie Steel Company, which he founded, he became a philanthropist of exceptional generosity. He was particularly supportive of educational endeavors, but he never ever forgot his Scottish roots. Carnegie sold his steel empire in 1901, and later that year he established the Carnegie Trust for the Universities of Scotland, a charitable trust that for more than a century has funded student scholarships and university research across the country, and is, if you like, a cousin of the Carnegie Corporation in New York, which he founded in 1911 with the mission of promoting the advancement and diffusion of knowledge and understanding. Andrew Carnegie devoted himself to philanthropy from his retirement in 1901 until his death in 1919, eventually giving away around $300 million of his fortune to charities, foundations, and of course, to universities. This represented around 90% of his wealth and would be equivalent, to put it into context, of tens of billions of dollars today, a level of philanthropy that is seldom seen and remains remarkable in its scale and in its scope. Andrew Carnegie's links to the University of St. Andrews go even deeper still, as many of you, I'm sure, will know. He served as rector for 2 terms between 1901 and 1907, and the financial contributions that he made during his lifetime allowed the university to expand its library and to build a sports field and a gymnasium. Having been talked out of giving an address on theology and religion by Principal Donaldson for his first rectorial address, a subject for which he has reputedly had little interest in and even less feel, he began his address by proclaiming his affection for St. Andrews and the indefinable charm under whose potent spell I now stand before you, quote, and focused instead on the growing dominance of the U.S. industrial base and other challenges across the world to the competitive dominance at the time of Europe and Britain. In his second rectorial address, he spoke on the value of arbitration in delivering peace, a subject of much preoccupation to him in his later years, in addition to his passionate advocacy of education and free access to knowledge and ideas for the educational and social advancement of all. And of course, that was manifested in his funding of libraries and educational institutions right around the world. It is in the spirit of Carnegie's entrepreneurship and his appreciation for knowledge that the Carnegie Lectures aim to bring the world's most creative thinkers in the arts, sciences, education, and international affairs to Scotland's universities. And our speaker today very much fits within that mold. Professor Patricia Hill-Collins is a distinguished American sociologist and scholar, renowned for her pioneering work in the fields of race, gender, and class. Born on May 1st, 1948, in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, Collins became a leading voice in Black Feminist Thought. She is best known for her groundbreaking book, Black Feminist Thought, Knowledge, Consciousness, and the Politics of Empowerment, first published in 1990, which introduced the concept of the matrix of domination to describe the interconnected nature of social stratification systems such as race, gender, and class. Professor Collins' work has significantly shaped the academic discourse on intersectionality, challenging traditional paradigms in sociology and feminist theory. Her ideas emphasize how different forms of oppression interact and how marginalized groups can resist and create new knowledge through their lived experiences. Throughout her career, Professor Collins has held esteemed academic positions, including serving as the first African-American woman to head the Department of Sociology at the University of Maryland, College Park. Her contributions have been recognized globally, and she has received numerous awards, including the American Sociological Association's highest honor, the Award for Distinguished Scholarship in 2017. In 2008, she became the 100th president of the American Sociological Association, the first African American elected to this position in the organization's 104-year history. And Professor Collins was inducted into the American Academy of Arts and Sciences in 2022, I think elected in 2022, and actually inducted very recently, if I'm not mistaken. 2 weeks ago, so it's that new. In addition to Black Feminist Thought, Collins has authored and co-authored other influential works, including Intersectionality with Sirma Bilge in 2016, on intellectual activism in 2012, and recently Lethal Intersections, Race, Gender, and Violence in 2023, which examines how violence differentially affects people according to their class, their sexuality, nationality, and ethnicity, and that's just to name a few of her books. And one of the really impressive things is it's amazing how many of these books went to second and third editions. And as an academic, if you get to a second edition, that's wonderful. Just getting beyond your immediate family reading your stuff is fantastic. But that's clearly indicative of the impact and influence that Professor Collins' work has had on the world. Her intellectual contributions continue to inspire scholars and activists across various disciplines, making her one of the most important voices in contemporary sociology and Black feminist theory. In recognition of her immense contributions to scholarship and social justice, Professor Collins was awarded the prestigious Berggruen Prize for Philosophy and Culture, which is a $1 million award that honors individuals whose ideas have profoundly shaped human self-understanding and advancement in our rapidly changing world. And this prestigious prize underscores Professor Collins' roles in shaping global conversations about equality, power, and justice. And I know from my conversations with her, it's a very special award for her because it very much speaks to her values as a scholar and as a person. We are immensely grateful to have Professor Collins delivering this year's Carnegie lecture. And with that, I want to introduce Professor Collins.
Well, let me look at you. You look pretty smart, are you? Oh, look at this. No sense of humor. Everyone's so timid. Well, I'd like to let you know I can see you, right? So if you think you can hide, I can see you even over here. Thank you very much. I know you, so you know I can see you. All right. I'm going to try very much to stay on time. I have a lot to say. I've brought a presentation that is forward-looking, forward-thinking. For me, I use my talks often to work through ideas. So the nice thing about having written so much and published so much is I can send you to extended versions of some of the concepts that I'm going to talk about tonight. But what I want to do tonight is basically do a synthetic talk, which is pulling together three big ideas: community, intersectionality, and participatory democracy. Now let me start off by reading why I chose this. Today we stand at a very important fork in the road in deciding what kind of future we want to build for ourselves. In this specific time and place that we inhabit, we each face a core question. What is my place and purpose in the world? What kind of person do I want to be? What kind of future do I want for myself and my loved ones? And what am I willing to do to move in that direction? Each of us as an individual is on a journey to live our lives to the fullest, to claim the talents we were born with, and to develop new talents as we grow. No matter how old or how young, I'm the old, by the way, no matter how old or how young we are, each of us must find our individual place and purpose in the world. But this common quest cannot be done alone. The I that defines each of us as individuals is part of a common we of some sort that is essential to our individual survival and aspirations. We cannot build the world that we want to live in by ourselves, nor can we live in it alone. In this sense, this common quest that joins us together as human beings requires a collective response now. We need a common language that can accommodate the immense diversity of human beings, that expresses our commonalities of vision, purpose, and action. And that language must have a view of group-based social action at its core in ways that does not impoverish the human spirit. I suggest that the construct of community offers possibilities and constraints for understanding group-based social action as well as our individual place within it. Each of us lives embedded within and shaped by multiple communities. If I were to ask you to think about the idea of community and to identify examples of it, what would you say? I'm going to assume you think of a neighborhood, a church, an online group, a fraternity, a sorority, academic colleagues, your friends. My daughter does roller derby, so she would think of a roller derby community. Yes, I have a daughter who does roller derby. Does anyone do roller derby here? No? Think about that. What's happening in St. Andrews? That was a long ride from Edinburgh. So there's no roller, that's okay. It's okay, I'm sure there are wonderful things here. I'm sorry. This is what happens when I get off topic. Let me come back. All right. Sports teams, extended families as community. This is an idea that we use to describe so many different kinds of social phenomena. It's a word of power because it is there. It's all the time, and we fill it in with what we think. So those of you who are attending this lecture in person are part of a temporary community gathered together today, in this particular place and at this particular time. And this fleeting community is embedded within the broader community of this particular university and beyond. And you can keep going. Layers of communities embedded within one another and talking to one another. So we need a language that talks about the group, that talks about group-based social action. And it does so in ways that enables us to build the future that we want. So in my talk today, I'm going to investigate a variety of ways that the construct of community is a word of power. Now let's think about what it is to have a word of power. A word of power for these broader individual and collective questions. A word of power is any term that reappears within public space that has the ability to generate collective emotions, communication, alliances, political outcomes, and action. Now, do any of you curse? Curse words? Thank you very much. Somebody owned this. You know, I curse a lot. Your hand went up really fast. All right. We notice that curse words are words of power because they violate norms, or they are intended to, if it's a derogatory term toward women, subordinate that person by calling that person a name. These curse words are words of power because they define norms of decency and are often used as weapons in contentious situations. And many of us are facing contentious situations today. We notice these words of power because they have the power to shock, intimidate, and silence. Other words of power become diluted within our culture. Freedom is a word of power. It's a word that a lot of people identify with that empowers them. But when that word becomes stripped of its radical potential, and it becomes, you are free if you buy my toothpaste, you're free if you come to my house and do this. If freedom becomes a commodity, it becomes attached to things that you can buy, as it very much happens in the marketplace. Look at words that are used a lot in the marketplace to sell you things. They tend to be words of power that are tapping into something that's more basic than just trying to sell you toothpaste. But some of the most powerful words of power are those that are commonplace and that make everyday life comprehensible and meaningful. Family is such a word. It is ubiquitous, yet constitutes a core principle that generates familiarity and strong feelings in everyone. But families can also be places of danger. This is a powerful word because so many of us relate to this word. Either we imagine the family we wish we had, or we criticize the family we've got because of who they are, or we glorify the family we have because we think they know all of the answers. It's a word of power. And I'm going to encourage you to look out for words of power that are annexed by political agendas that are not our own. All right, so that's where we're going with this. So I suggest that community is one such word of power that, like family, is hiding in plain sight. The word community does a lot of heavy lifting across many situations. I've been here 3 days and I've heard pretty much everybody use the term community, but in a different way, depending on different communities that they were talking about, because that it has that kind of a cachet. It's really useful, malleable. So in my talk today, I want to look at 3 core questions. Oh, you know what? My first slide was supposed to be up there. I didn't even tell you that. Oops. That's the first slide. That's the only graphic I have. So you just have to kind of look at that and say, I found that graphic for you because it has all those nodes in it. And later on, I'll come back for intersectionality and et cetera. Just picture that in your mind. How are you all doing out there? Okay? All right. I like giving talks, but this is the issue. I think we just lost 15 seconds right there. All right. But today's presentation is organized around 3 core themes. Next slide, then next slide. Boom, next slide. They're fast readers. Okay. Now we're going into, I already talked about that. We're going into all of the boring black and white stuff in this PowerPoint. All right. You're used to reading boring black and white stuff because you read actual books. Yes? All right, people who are online, everything is like flying around and it's beautiful colors and it's sort of distracting. We're not going to do that. All right. First, why is community important? In other words, why does community matter? Why should we spend our time thinking about something that is so taken for granted? Despite its ubiquity, community is under-theorized, I would argue, yet extremely influential in shaping the social and political contours of our lives. So what I've been thinking about for a while is how this word of power works in different situations. For the first part of the talk, I'll be talking about some experiences of my own to give you a sense of that term. Second, what tools do we need to reimagine community? So the second part of my talk, I'll be talking about intersectionality and social inequality. Now, I've published quite a bit in this area, so I'm not going to go into detail, but it's just a question of making that connection between this ordinary word of community that does heavy lifting around these issues and connecting it to part 3, what's at stake. What's at stake, as I see it, is a diminishing vision of participatory democracy under assault, and to talk about how we can think about intervening in that future from now. So I want to just see what we can do with this word of power if we take it back, be perfectly frank. All right, so let's move on, and now I'm going to do something else. Is everybody okay out there? Seriously, are you? Are you lying, or is this kind of like fake stuff you're doing right now? I'm sorry, is that not professional enough for you? Okay, this is St. Andrews. I just thought you all would be just way more fun. Okay, all right. Ooh, that got your attention, didn't it? Okay, sorry. Okay. I'm just having fun with you, all right? But I want to start off by talking about community as a word of power. And I'm going to put this next slide up, which is, keep going, which is community as a word of power, St. Joseph's Community School. So I'm going to tell a story. I'm going to really trace this concept for you 3 different points in time across the arc of my career. I've been interested in this for a while without knowing it. You might be interested in something that you don't know you're interested in and doesn't have a name yet. But I had this term that kept reappearing when I was an undergraduate. I wrote a senior honors thesis on community control of Black schools, or Black community control of schools. I was interested in African American communities and what was happening in the United States in terms of social inequality. And I was interested in how education was a site of oppression. Now, we sit in a room here, I stand in a room here today where education should not be a site of oppression. It should be a site of providing critical tools that allow you to engage the world, the kinds of questions that I started the talk with. But that is not the experience that many Black kids had. So I wrote a senior honors thesis, and I thought, let's see what we can do with this. What can communities do? Well, little did I know that that really was a strong interest of mine. I mean, I went off to graduate school in education and had a little bit, I took some classes and I know stuff. I mean, I really do. I went to a good school, so it all worked out. Harvard. Okay, finally. You heard that, okay. No, but the thing is, it really, I ended up going directly into, as a result of my graduate school experience, helping to plan and implement a community school. Because what really happened during that period of time was you had multiple people who were concerned about a shared social problem. And they were people who were very different from one another. Often people think about communities as sites of groupthink. You know, they're organized around ideology. Come with us around our ideology. We will build a community. We don't want all those differences. But this was a community task that had to be grounded in the talents and skills of multiple people. We were able to procure buildings from the Archdiocese of Boston. They were closing schools in Black neighborhoods, and so that the parochial schools were going to go away. But the Archdiocese did not, and I'm not Catholic, so this was really an interesting history for me to sort of engage in. But the Archdiocese was willing to provide the building and upkeep of the building if we provided the personnel and the funding for everything else. So we all went out to fundraise to say, what's our vision? What is our vision for a school that would educate Black children well? What's involved with that? Surprise, surprise, everyone had a different vision. They had a different point of view. And what we had to do was we had to figure out processes of consensus and conflict. You know, that's what was going on in order to do this particular project. Now, I was a young teacher at that time. I love to think of myself as a young teacher. I was just all cute. Let me just be cute out here like I was as a young teacher. All right, and I taught dance. Oh, yeah. I mean, I had a lot going on at that time, all right? And I still do. We all heard that, right? All right. But at the time, what was interesting to me was I was really interested in issues of teaching, curriculum development. What could I do with the curriculum? No one was giving me a scripted curriculum. There was no tradition that we had to adhere to. There were no rules that we had to adhere to. We really could decide what we wanted to do in imagining and creating a school, which of course involved imagining community. You see where I'm going with this. But in my case, the things that I learned from my students, the first day I taught middle school. Yes, I'm a person that likes pain and suffering. It was middle school. But that's a wonderful period of time when children are becoming adults, when they're actually open, they're really pain to work with, to be honest with you. But they were really open to asking all kinds of questions, and everything was on the table. And that can be incredibly annoying if you're the one that's trying to defend tradition when they're asking you about it. But we were saying, well, let's see which parts of tradition we're going to keep and which parts we really need to massage and which we need to leave behind. First day, I was ready with my ideas. The students looked at me and they said, where do you want us to sit, Ms. Hill? The room was set up with a circle. I changed the chairs. They looked at me like, why, what, where should we sit? No, tell us where to sit. We need to know where to go. And I'm looking, don't you children know how to sit in chairs? Those are chairs, go sit in them. No, that wasn't it. They said, this is not the way the room is supposed to be arranged. And then they told me how the room was supposed to be arranged. It was supposed to be arranged as a traditional lecture hall. That's kind of what we got going on here, where you've got people in the front, people, in fact, we're doing the exact same thing that my faculty's in the front. You know, so we were doing exactly what this room was telling them. The teachers that they had in the past told them, we have rows, and the closer you are to the front, those are the A students. The people who sit behind those A students are the B students. The people who sit behind those students are the C students, and so on until you get to the back row, where you've got the students where you can say, I can write you off from the minute you walk in the door because you're in the back row. You're unteachable. And I'm telling you that not by ever saying a word. I'm telling you that by the institutional structure of where the chairs are. You hear this example? Now, I wouldn't have noticed that at all, because I'd spent all these years in school just happily sitting some places without people telling me the discourse around what it meant where I sat, until the kids told me that. I said, okay, we're not doing that. I'm the teacher. Oh, yeah. We're sitting in a circle. But then other things came up, like, what was I going to teach them? How would I teach them about things that they needed to know, but teach them in a new way? We wanted to teach them about Black history and Black culture and Black politics. I wanted to teach them about South Africa, because there was a lot that they needed to know that was happening. It was still colonized at that point, right? No, it wasn't colonized. It was a free country, but it was apartheid, right? So I wanted to teach them, but the materials that we had in this school were really limited. You had to be creative to use the materials that you had. So all I could get was a free film from the South African Tourist Board. And I asked the students, well, what would you expect to see in this film? And they said, we know this question. And they said, we know this one, because they always accused me of being tricky. All right. They said, well, we know this one. We would expect to see a lot of Africans. I said, that would be a reasonable explanation. How would they look? Well, of course, they'd be Black people. All right, so you would expect to see Black Africans. So I'm going to show you the film from the South African Tourist Board. And what we watched was the film that represented a nation that had 2 Black people in it. One of them was a Black man way in the back turning the numbers on the South African Stock Exchange. And the second was a Black woman sitting on a bench minding a white baby. The entire Black population of South Africa had been erased. So I thought, this is interesting, because I had prepared them to look for absence. Now, when you're in a curriculum, you're not taught to look for absence, what's missing. But that's what I had to do my entire career as a student, to think about who was not there in the book. Are you still with me with this? Yeah, this is kind of how you begin to say, we're going to think about how we do school. Now, this left me with bad materials, but with great ideas about how to use them, but it also left me thinking, where would I find the material that my students needed? How would I create it? And it was but it was also a we exercise. But I, as a teacher, realized that all the books that I was reading in Black history and Black studies and Black women's fiction and all the stuff that I'm actually known for for Black Feminist Thought, they had no access to that, because it was not written for them or to them. So I set out to do all of this, drum roll please, research, by reading this work and translating it into a language that was comprehensible for them. So a lot of what we do, a lot of what I've done, is this skill of translation, going between multiple communities to think about what's there, how they can talk to each other. Now, the kids had no opportunity to talk back to all the people who were doing the works that they were exposed to. But that was okay. They would grow up. It would be different. Now, St. Joseph's Community School was a school that the entire school was dedicated to thinking about the combination of thinking and doing. The entire school was thinking about something called critical praxis. We had to, on a daily basis, ask ourselves about what we were doing. We had to change our processes and be creative. That's what was involved with imagining and building a community. And there were many different people in that community. Did I tell you about the nuns? Did I tell you about the grad students? I don't think I did. Did I tell you about the parents who were working in the school? Did I tell you that we had an errant priest running through there from time to time? I don't know where he came from, but he showed up occasionally. Did I tell you I had a colleague who was a felon who had gone to jail, and now he was helping out and doing volunteer work in the school? Did I tell you? I don't think I did, that there was a Black business community that was in there. We had a constituency of people who were very different from one another. But what they shared was they cared about the education of Black children. And that common goal, that common sensibility, that common ethical sensibility that drove us together, because we saw the social injustices in other places, is what lay at the heart of that project. Now, I worked with that project for 5 years. I worked in that school for 2 years and then 2 more as we expanded the community schools to a network of 3 schools, and they were each different. But this is community organizing and building community from the bottom up. So when people tell me, when I travel to places far and wide, that'll never happen, that's not possible, that's just too idealistic, I'll say, was it idealistic? Yes, it was. But it was possible. Because now, losing the ability to dream is what really slows a lot of people down. Am I being too like preachy to you? Are you okay out there? I'm enjoying this myself personally, but I'm hoping that it is substantive enough for you. I think I saw somebody yawn back there who probably has a night job. You saw me, you yawned, right? Put your hand up. You know who did it. See, he's looking guilty. All right, over here you're a little safer because my sight of vision is that direction. All right, but basically, this whole notion of St. Joseph's School, the challenge of building an educational community across different experiences and areas of expertise. We all had a little something to contribute, but we didn't have the same thing. Nobody was the expert with all the answers, but many of us were experts in various things. So crafting a community out of diversity and heterogeneity was incredibly creative. We don't realize how we are really shut down when we're sort of all with people just like us, or at least we think they're just like us, because everybody's pretending to be just like us. All right. Critical praxis, emerged as the thinking and doing all aspects of the organization of the school. I don't know if that's a sentence or not, but I think I actually described that, all right? Scaling up, you can't scale up this kind of work. Or I'm gonna come back to scaling up later in the talk because the difficulty is scaling up. Is thinking that what little communities are like is very much the same as bigger communities. I'll come to that later. And the implication was an exercise in participatory democracy, the small d of face-to-face political engagement. Let's move on to the next one. Fast forward. Yes, fast forward. By now, I have all grown up. It's 2009, and I get elected president of the American Sociological Association. This was completely unexpected. I had not followed a traditional career path of sociology. I was not downtrodden. I was not scruffy looking. Sociologists are not known for being stylish. You know this, right? In a lot of ways, I was an outlier. I can say race and gender and all that, but I just hadn't followed it, and somehow I found myself, based on my work and people who organized, I got nominated and I won. Now, you would think that this would be wonderful, but when I was elected, it was another set of issues. I had to plan the program. We had a program for 5,000 sociologists. Now, imagine yourself running a unit where you're attempting to throw a party for 5,000 sociologists. You do know that sociologists are like herding cats. You know this, right? Everyone has an opinion. And then when it's time to do the work, all of a sudden, where'd you all go? That kind of thing. The cats have scampered off somewhere. So the whole question of thinking about what would represent the discipline, what would be at it would be at the heart of the discipline itself. Everyone expected me to do a program on race. We know she's going to do race, or maybe she'll do race and gender. Oh yes, we need that. Do race and gender that go together. Do that. Why would I be predictable? Why wouldn't I not reach beyond what's in the here and now to think about what might be? So I decided my program theme was going to be the new politics of community, and what I was going to do was think about community as a word of power and begin to put some conceptual weight onto that. You notice at the bottom, communities are ubiquitous. Why are they words of power? Why is it a word of power? They're ubiquitous, they're naturalized, normalized, and unexamined, taken for granted. You just use that to kind of make reality out of what you think community is. It's versatile, malleable, difficult to define, yet easy to use. 3 days I heard all these different uses of community. Just start listening, you'll hear it. when you start looking for it, and you say, what do you have in mind when you use this word? You know, what kind of image? It has contradictory meanings. Doesn't mean the same thing to different people. It catalyzes strong, deep feelings that can move people to action. People care about their communities, or they really hate other communities. Politicians are quite skilled at tapping into words of power for particular political agendas. If you start looking at far-right discourse, it talks about them, those other people, those other communities. I'll get to in a minute sort of how that becomes racialized and genderized and all that. But the fact of being able to harness feelings, that's really different than talking about publics and groups and all those that kind of language that distances us from communities, where people, if you think about the communities that you're in, these are places where people yell and scream at each other sometimes, they cry, sometimes they hug each other, sometimes they look up stuff, they teach each other. A lot goes on in a community. They care for each other, for dependent members who cannot take care of themselves. And it's the language, I would argue. This is the big thing for me. The language that people use to think and do politics. We often think about political processes implicitly using some understanding of community as we're thinking about group work, or if we're thinking about trying to organize a health initiative, or if we're thinking about how to go to the State House and get a better vote, or whatever. Or if we're looking top down, how do we get the public to vote for us? What shall we tell them? We want to tell them they're part of my community, I see you, kind of thing. Vote for me. We have that going on in America right now. I'm sure you notice we have a high-stakes election, but I'm trying not to talk about it. It distresses me. All right. So in my article, The New Politics of Community, which I published as the my presidential address, I would encourage you to go find it. It's free because it's published, kind of thing. And you live in a school, you go to school in a school and work in a school that has a great library. All right, so you can get that. But these were the terms that I came up with in terms of thinking about community as a word of power. And then, the way I just set that argument was 5 sites. I decided I'm going to look for 5 really different places where community operates as a word of power. First one, gated communities. Now, I don't know, gated communities are communities. They're communities with fences around them to help us see that they are for people who live there. And there will be a guard that says you can come in or you can't, whether it's an apartment building or whether it is just fancy hedges where it's really hard to do. Or some would argue St. Andrews might be a gated community because you're so far from things. Some gated communities have to be close in. They're done through surveillance. You know you're being watched. The cameras, the surveillance techniques have really established since I wrote this some years ago that as metaphor and reality have come a great distance. It's sort of the monitoring of geographic space. Who belongs, who doesn't belong, who's there, who's not there. And that is, by the way, to foreshadow, very racially prescribed, class prescribed. All of that begins to come in there. Emerging communities. At the time, I was like pointing to something that was emerging, virtual communities. Well, we are in a whole other ballgame now in terms of social media and online communities and the ability to organize online. That can go in so many different directions. People either tend to love the media or hate it and be afraid of it. But I think it's somewhere in between. It's a tool. And a tool for community organizing. LGBTQ people, youth, have been able to find each other across the globe using social media, using the internet, using those mechanisms to recognize it's not just me. I thought it was just me. It's not me. Wow, there's lots of people. So it's really been a strategy for community organizing. At the same time, these emerging communities have been hate speech communities online. That's what we often hear about because that is very distressing, the disinformation, the misinformation, to create communities who can then act anonymously in ways that are harmful. So it's a really interesting thing there. Grassroots politics, I think I don't have to say much about that, and the significance of community. People cling very strongly to where they live locally because that's how they imagine community. It's their people. It's an extension of family, which is really at the heart of all of this. Citizenship and the call to service, these last couple ones, and more, if I had more time, I would actually say more about that. But I'm going to encourage you to just take a look at that last, the article, New Politics of Community, because what I attempted to do was lay a foundation for developing a conceptual, theoretical thought or analysis of community as a word of power and politics. So let's move on. I am never going to finish this talk in this time. I'm just letting you know. I knew this was going to happen to me. Let's move to the next slide. Did you hear part 2? I gave it already. You didn't notice it, did you? No. I'm going to have to say a few things about intersectionality and social inequality, but not much. Because here I would very much encourage you to I feel I can actually say this. You can just read my work. There's so much of it out there. But basically, the bottom line is I consider intersectionality to be a very important tool for analyzing social inequality, not through a solitary lens of racism or heteropatriarchy or nationalism or class exploitation capitalism, but the relationship between those systems of power means that we have a much more robust intellectual language. We have more robust intellectual communities that can happen. And we have, I would hope, a more robust politics that comes from that. So anyhow, next slide. Making the connections. Let me just briefly make them and then move on. Intersectionality, for those of you, just a basic statement here, examines how intersecting power relations of race, class, gender, sexuality, ability, nation, and age, among others. It's a big project. It's not my project. It's lots of people working on this. Are organized, endure, change, and resisted. Well, when I was laboring away on intersectionality all these years and it was not popular, it was so nice. Because you could just do all this work, and sort of like, oh boy, this is kind of, ooh, let's do this. And this is coming, by the way, from my St. Joseph's experiences, where it was a very much an intersectional experience, all right? So we're doing the work. And then when it became popular, it was sort of, this is really going to be interesting, and to see how this potential word of power becomes reframed if we lose it. So before I move on, community is a core concept for intersectionality's critical praxis. And I'm just going to point out that community, there are interpretive communities. This would be your discipline that you're being introduced to, what you're studying. That's an interpretive community. It has rules. It has things you shouldn't do. It has questions that are important and questions that are ignored. That's the point of drawing a boundary around an interpretive community. Now, that can be a really empowering space, or that can be incredibly limited if epistemologically you are excluded from that space. The rules themselves do not let you in. That may be above some of you, we can come back to that. And political communities, which are practices of creating and using intersectional knowledge, right? And that's kind of what we were doing in St. Joe's, both of these, to be honest with you. I had no language at the time for that, and I was trying to develop the language in my presidential address. But now moving on to the next slide. This is going to save you all so much time. It's going to take you, if you are interested, far less time to read these 3 books than it took me to write them, all right? Might I say this to you, all right? This is my gift to you. So you do not have to go out there and do all of the work that goes into each of these books. I have published 3 books in intersectionality in the since 2016, I don't know what it is, my math is going, 8 years, all right? And that's a lot of books. And basically, these 3 books work together as a where are the books? Next slide, sorry. There they are. All right, and Lethal Intersections kind of fades because it's a white cover, all right? So it's kind of interesting to see it up here. But each of these 3 books is part of a 3-legged stool. So you may be interested in one part more than another. This is the issue. And then you can carry on, or you can just not go any further or not even read any of them, just read a little bit. But the book to the far left, Intersectionality, that's co-authored with Sirma Bilge, my colleague, who is a Turkish sociologist who lives in Montreal. She really is sort of has it all going on there, all right, was published in 2016 and a revision in 2020. And if they had, by Polity Press, and if they had their way, we would be doing another edition, but couldn't happen. This is the book that is a good introductory, basic synthesis of intersectionality that really looks at intersectionality as a project that has come from multiple social justice projects. And it's global, and it has lots of examples, and it opens up with the World Cup. Do you like soccer? I had to learn soccer for this because I don't know much about soccer. But the whole notion of looking for metaphors of intersectionality, of race, class, gender, nation, etc. So this, I think, is a really good book for, I wouldn't say classroom use, but just for personal edification and can be taught. The book in the middle is Intersectionality as Critical Social Theory. Now, this book I wrote because I could see, as early as 2024, I could see the academic politics circling around intersectionality. Ooh, here's how it went in everyday language. If I put intersectionality in the name of my article, it is likely to get published because it is popular. And all of a sudden, all of these articles started appearing that had intersectionality in the title. It's like that was the hottest new thing. You do realize that academics are just real fickle fashion people. I mean, following trends, it's like, what's the latest thing that's in? I want to wear it kind of thing. Oh, sorry, I digress. But, if it rings true, it rings true. What can I say? I'm here to speak the truth from the podium. It's a crystal. My podium, I can't hide behind it. So, no, but what was interesting really was that. And then if you really dug into each of the articles that were just coming out everywhere, and I looked at the citations, always check your references, check other people's references, see what they've read. That'll give you a sense of how they're positioning themselves within an interpretive community. I discovered they were only citing Kimberly Crenshaw. Everybody had apparently read one article by Kimberly Crenshaw, and she'd actually written 2 and more, all right? But they weren't even getting to the second article. It was just this one article. Intersectionality was coined by Kimberly Crenshaw. It was a really interesting use. It was coined, as in it was made valuable by her, thus tying into sort of capitalist relations and colonial relations that she conquered it. She discovered it. She's the one who named it. It's like the guy we sent to the moon named the moon kind of thing. It was kind of the colonial thing of I got here first and I have naming rights over my star. So I just thought this is a really interesting linguistic situation of what's going on with this term. So once I noticed that, I said, I got to get busy. I have to get out in front of this because if you don't define your life, other people will define your life for you. So you really have to define things yourself if you really care about it. You can't just stand by going, oh, look what they're doing to our word. Look what they're doing. Look what they're doing. No, it's like claiming ownership and saying, we are going to be leaders here. We have to have ideas and take ownership of our own ideas, and however they go. So Intersectionality as Critical Social Theory was my book that basically said, I'm going to write a theoretical book about intersectionality as critical social theory. And I'm not even going to claim it's a critical social theory. I'm going to make you work. Right? So I'm going to say, what is it exactly? Well, it's a metaphor. It's a this, it's a that. It's a survey of the intellectual ideas in the field. As they come from multiple places, not just academics, but people who are doing activist work, and how they have contributed to this as well. So I had to kind of, flex my muscle there, and I did flex it pretty well, I think. The third book was much more a concept from intersectionality, the way activists also end up in it. It's starting from solving a social problem. Many people enter into this work through social problem solving. They have a problem. They want to know what to do. Violence is a global social problem. It is a universal problem. It is a problem for the globe. It is a problem within families. It is a problem in actual geographic communities. And I started not with the language of violence from above, because we have some wonderful work that's done on violence as theoretical work. But it kind of missed the point for me. I wanted to start theorizing violence from the perspective of people who were trying to resist it or change it. Somehow their lives had been affected by it, and they reached out. But what happened was I chose examples that were race, class, gender, global, many examples. I wanted a constellation of sites, very much as I did in the paper, The New Politics of Community, the sites that I mentioned earlier. I wanted to have familiarity. Let's say I'm dealing with school shootings, which are in the book, or gun rights in America, which is in the book, or police death in custody, which is in Australia. A young Maori woman dies in custody, not because she was beaten, but through neglect, right? Or the person who's assassinated because her ideas are too powerful, and they are ideas about anti-violence. What's the outcome? Now, I could tell those stories in such a way that they're designed, that kind of violence is designed to oppress. But what about the people who refuse to go down that road and say, we're going to push back? So the way I constructed this book was to look for all the ways that people resisted violence that led us to an analysis of intersectionality, and what led them to an analysis of intersectionality. That was the book. That's why that book tore my heart out to write. And I am just recovering from that book. Hello. Thank you very much. I turned it in a whole year late. That is not me. I do not turn things in late. Don't turn anything. That's not a good thing, all right? I just couldn't do it. It was too emotionally difficult to do. To write a book about something called lethal intersections. To start with the places where people are faced with violence and the threat of death or actual deaths, as the case may be. And to say, what has been the reaction to that from people who want to know their place and purpose in the world that's often given to them when your child is killed? That's your place and purpose in the world, in Argentina or other places, neighborhoods in Detroit. So anyhow, I don't want to keep going on that, but at some point I couldn't even present the book. It was just too hard for me. All right, enough of me. I know what you're thinking. All right, let's get back to the next slide. Oh, sorry, I just thought I wanted to bond for a minute with my audience. All right, but basically these are some ideas about intersectionality and social inequality. You can find this in any of those works, but these are some of the core ideas. I will leave them up for a minute and maybe just talk about one and then move on. And this is the one I already mentioned, that intersectionality examines how social inequalities within intersecting power relations are organized, endure, change, and are resisted. That is exactly what lethal intersections did. And it started from the place of problem solving, not from the place of explaining the world. So much of what we do in academia is explaining the world. But a lot of people are living in a problem solving environment. That was the St. Joseph's environment. How do we solve this problem that we have? And it has to be solved with theoretical tools and thinking tools and political tools. Similar thing. So in looking at social inequalities and then thinking about all the different places where people were dealing with different social inequalities and violence, intersectionality is a home for people to go to, a space, a community space, all right, an interpretive community where you can find people working on similar things, but no groupthink at all. There are actually pretty substantial battles between traditions of race and gender, for example. These people don't always love each other and just hug each other and all of that. This has to be constructed. All right, so let me move on to common concerns, and then I will finish up in 3 minutes of brilliance. I know I can do it. This is me. All right, next slide. Common concerns, intersectionality and participatory democracy. Segueing into the final section of the talk. Both of these ideas aspire to imagine new social relations of equality, fairness, and social justice. They share a common mission. One thing that I think is quite important for intellectual work is to understand the ethical foundations that underlie our work. Whether you're writing a freshman paper or if you're me writing all these fancy books, what are we committed to and why are we doing it? So intersectionality and the idea of participatory democracy, we get to decide, people get to decide. Shared power, shared governance, whatever words you want to attach to it right this minute. I think both of them aspire for new social relations to make the world better. So the future you want to live in? Both confront similar questions of building intellectual and political communities. That's what intersectionality is trying to do right now. And that is certainly what many democratic societies of the world are trying to do right now. I can't speak to Scotland. You all are pretty frisky and on your own there. You've got this whole tradition here of, I don't know, this Scottish tradition. I'm trying to understand that, all right? But as independent kind of thing. But I think we really are looking at many countries where citizen participation is being suppressed increasingly. They're not moving in the directions of participatory democracy, even though they may still be carrying the term democracy on their masthead. That is not what they're doing. So this is now looking at the difference between what I say and what I do. That's that praxis again. All right, action and thinking, what I say and what I do. For both projects, addressing these concerns rests on the ability to build inclusive political communities across differences of power. That is the task ahead. We cannot tell all the migrants to go home. We cannot tell all the women to go back in the kitchen or the bedroom, wherever you want to send them. We cannot tell all the poor people, stay poor, that is your lot in life. We cannot tell all the people of diverse religions, you're wrong, become a Christian or become a Muslim. We cannot do that. The boxes of the past, the conceptions of community of the past, which were very homogeneous and grounded in sameness, we can't go back because we don't live in that world anymore. So, for both of these projects, addressing these concerns rests on the ability to build inclusive political communities across differences in power. And for both, the viability of their respective projects requires identifying effective political strategies within the intersecting power relations in which they are situated. Case of St. Joseph's School. Now let me move on and finish up very quickly. Third part, next slide. Participatory democracy under construction, and that's my title. It's under construction because it's not a linear process where you had a great Magna Carta and then you just keep going forward. It's under construction based on what we do, what's at stake. Some of you, next slide, may be familiar with the work of Benedict Andersen, his 1983 book, Imagined Communities. This is a book about nationalism. It's about nations, national identity, nationalism, and nation states. And it provides a vocabulary for how to think about nation states, whether Scotland or US or Argentina or Canada or Gambia. I mean, we now deal with a world of sovereign nation states. And many of them claim to be democratic. India, democratic nation states. China, not saying it's democratic at all. It's not claiming that. But anyhow, he gives us work to begin to think about that level of political organization as an imagined community. These are the communities you belong to where you will never meet the people face to face in the community you belong to. You claim a community, but you're not going to meet the people. So imagined communities have to find ways to adjudicate those relationships. And this is what I've been talking about with intersectionality. The question is not whether we imagine communities, but the terms by which we do so. Now let me ask you this. How's your energy level? I have 2 more ideas. Should I tell you your 2 ideas? Or should you I'll just tell them to you and you just kind of go, more ideas. My head is about ready to explode, I can't believe it. All right, now I want you to look to the person next to you. They're not ugly, they're really nice, they're in your temporary community. You may even know their name. You might be trying to date them, I don't know, all right? This is your life. And say, okay, we can do this. This is a collective effort, right? This is me, the coach, to the team. We can do this, team, all right? We can make it to the end of this talk. Not on time, but we're gonna make it, all right? I apologize, sincerely apologize to the Carnegie lecture people, because this is not your standard Carnegie lecture. I'm supposed to be, hello. I am Patricia Collins, giving you the Carnegie lecture. Take notes, lots of them. Okay, no. I want you to think. And whatever sticks, sticks. If it doesn't stick, it doesn't. Something will stick. I don't know what it is. That's how people learn. They actually reformulate things that are presented to them in one way to make sense to themselves. So I'm fine with that. Won't hurt my feelings at all. I have two ideas I just want to leave you with, because I think they're really important. Oh, next slide. I think they're really important for thinking about community as a word of power and action, and how it might affect participatory democracies. And it really speaks to a lot of what I've already said. So it's kind of a summary of what I've already said, but the first term is how we think about solidarity. How do you think about what you have in common with other people? Do you think you have things in common with them because you all agree? And then the bad people are the people not in your community who don't agree with you cool people who are in it, that kind of thing. Solidarity is often a view of a groupthink. Ideological perspectives, communities built around ideologies, often are not flexible. They have solidarity based on agreement, being on towing the line. This is what happens with far-right ideologies in particular. You can see it. To be in our community of us, you have to demonize them, those people over there. We don't even want to compromise. It's us or them. They're going to kill us, so we better hang together because they're dangerous. Those dangerous immigrants, those dangerous black people, those dangerous Muslims, those dangerous whoever they are, those dangerous women, we're really afraid of them. My God, some of those women, they'll kill you in your sleep kind of thing. They're not the right kind of woman. So, you've got this whole fear that in some ways you're joining a community that has ideological purity. And if you don't measure up, there's something wrong with you in that particular community. That is not what I'm talking about. That's one view of looking at solidarity, and to be perfectly frank, that can happen on the left and the right. It's the same behaviors on the left. It's not so much the content of the ideology. But flexible solidarity is a solidarity that's built on the give and take of having an active, alive, vital community. It's a political principle for building and sustaining communities. This is what you have to do to get work done. This is what you have to do to move forward. It's not just compromise of winners and losers. I won, you lost, we're going to do it my way, intergenerationally. That's not it at all. It's really a question of being flexible around making decisions about things that are important to all of us. Reimagining community is central to small group settings, especially those communities where people have extended face-to-face contact with one another. That's the small d of democracy. The imagining communities, the small ones. That's hard enough. On campus, have you been in groups that you just don't get along initially? You really have to work with people you don't like for one reason or another. Oh, come on, don't tell me St. Andrews is like, Nirvana or something like that. Utopia, is that what you're trying to tell me? Okay, I'm looking at your faces and I'm thinking, I just don't believe you, all right? Because, when you get in the room, you realize the small d democracy in some ways is a lot easier than the big D democracy of nation-state democracy, national democracy, thinking about participation through public policy. How do we get people to imagine themselves as part of a community where they're not perpetual winners and losers, but where they're actually engaged in engaged in a flexible solidarity? We're in this together, but we have to be flexible. Next slide. That's one concept to chew on, to take with you. And the second one, I think I'm going to stop with this one, is coalition politics. How do we transcend the barriers created by our experiences with intersecting oppressions in order to build the types of coalitions necessary for social change? Now, coalitions are bandied about as just inherently a good thing, but I really want us to drill down into what coalitional politics are like, to give you a bit more language that's a bit more detailed or substantive on this. I see something called coalitions of convenience, where you have shared vested interest in social problem solving. Coalition of convenience, somebody is littering the campus. Many of you are disturbed. No one would ever do that in St. Andrews. It's purely hypothetical, obviously. But someone is throwing trash on the campus. And and many of you are disturbed by that from very different communities. And you get together and get a coalitions and you go to one of those principal people who are running the school and you say, clean up the trash, all right? That is a coalition of convenience. And very often we look at coalitional politics as shared interests at a certain point in time, at a certain place, That's important. Coalition politics of convenience are really important because a lot of these struggles you cannot win on your own. But coalitions of conscience are more long-term. These are the kinds of things you enter into because you really, really care and you cannot let it go. When I talked earlier, long-term commitment to building a sustainable community. These are community organizers. When I talked earlier about the violence work, the people who were committed to anti-violence work for their entire lives and were committed to building coalitions with other people who were also committed their entire lives were forming a coalition of conscience, not just convenience. They could not stop. In Lethal Intersections, I have an example of a film that is called Agent Orange, if you've ever seen it. It's a documentary. And in that film, you have two women who engage in a coalition of conscience across tremendous differences of time and place and all of that. They are very bothered by the pollution of that particular drug in Vietnam. And that's not going to go away in terms of the impact, the damage, the violence that was done to their children as a result of that. So you really have people who are in this for the long haul. They are not going to quit. And those are different kinds of coalitions that will have a through story, that the groups may change, the people may change, but there will be a through story until there is some kind of reconciliation. And those tend to be the long stories of racism and gender. Those are long arc stories. Those can't be solved by band-aids of diversity, equity, and inclusion. Small steps. That's nice. It makes life better if we're not all screaming at each other. But these kinds of problems involve deep-seated, long-term commitment. So I think now that I've talked about reimagining community and given you all this vocabulary, and now that I've talked about a little bit about intersectionality, and I've talked about reimagining community, the whole notion of participatory democracy as a reimagined community. And your job will be to continue to reimagine that, to take it forward. Not me. Well, I will as long as I can, but it's going to be for you. I think that this is an appropriate time for me to pause and to thank you all for being such an attentive audience and for being so well behaved. And just for listening. That's all I want you to do. Don't have to believe, but just listen. Thank you.
Lecture. So we've got a few minutes now where we can take some questions. So if anybody wants to start, we got a couple of roving microphones around the room. So who's going to be the first one? We got a couple down here. So, yep, go ahead. Thanks, Audrey.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor Collins. So you talk about safe spaces in the book, Black Feminist Thought, and I wondered, given that you talked about community today, if you have anything to say about the idea of exclusivity in communities and the idea of can that make people safer, can it make people less safe, and that kind of thing.
Do I just take the arm of my own? Okay, I like my own. Well, maybe not. Okay. I go to the gym. All right. The whole notion of safe space has all kind of been trivialized and turned into kind of an administrative thing, so that when people often come into classrooms, they say, I'm triggered by this, I'm triggered by that, I want a safe space. The whole notion of guaranteeing safe spaces by excluding conflict and by making safe space means no one dangerous is in there, all right? Ideas are not dangerous. People are dangerous when they're doing things. So I look at it that way. So for me, a safe space is a space that is telling you will always be listened to. That doesn't mean you will always be agreed with. That does not mean you're always right. And that doesn't mean we're going to make it comfortable for you by making you feel safe and warm and wearing slippers and fuzzy. All right? It's a place where really ideas can be exchanged. It's where you can relax and say, I know I'm with people who care. Now, very often those kinds of safe spaces have come with what would be called exclusionary communities. They've come among black women who say, I can really let my hair down and tell you what it's like for me to work in this university. Oh, not this one, that's purely a whole other thing. That's not here, all right. But in my own experience, that's really what that has been. Now that whole thing would be completely different if you had a white dude in the middle of the meeting saying, I want to be in your safe space and I'm a really good guy. No, it's not for you. So sometimes it's okay to have exclusionary spaces, depending on what is being talked about. And the people who are excluded doesn't mean they're excluded, that means they have to do something else around that same issue. A really good example for me would be rape culture. You do not want to be in a room of women who are sharing about their experiences with sexual violence and make that a multi-gendered situation. It's all right for men who care about that to respect that space that women need. So I think we can do better. But what happens when everybody gets so nervous about it, I'm so afraid of hurting your feelings, I'm so afraid of saying anything, it just shuts down the flow of ideas that we need to tackle these kinds of issues that we're dealing with. So I would encourage you to be bold. It's better to be wrong and have someone look horrified that you said something really offensive. And you said it innocently. If you said it innocently in a community of people that says all ideas are welcome, then that's a teachable moment for everyone, not just you that said this offensive thing, but that's how you learn. You learn by opening yourself up. So safe spaces should do that intellectually, whether they're populated by people who all look the same or not.
That was a great question, thank you. I saw a couple more down here. I think that there was, yeah, so right down here in the, thanks, Audrey.
Right, thank you very much, Professor Collins. And I think you also briefly mentioned this at the beginning of your lecture, but I just want to know more of your insight, which is on the relations between individualism and intersectionality and community.
I think where we are now is really interesting. The reason I'm talking about groups much more and structural issues much more is I entered intersectionality through that particular door. You see, we all enter intersectionality through different paths. And then we're surprised when we're in the crossroads and we realize we're using the same language, but we're talking about different things. All right, that's really the process of doing this work. So the whole notion of intersectionality for me was really structural. And then I just noticed over time, depending on the effects of other discourses, and also postmodernism and post-structural social theory, which really goes in a certain direction around all of this, to the individual and beyond, that it was hard to get out of the individualism. So I think that there's very much people assuming that their own personal politics, their experiences, stand for the universe. You know, I'm a black woman who does this, that, and the other. That means a lot. Well, that means a lot as an individual identity, but what does that mean in terms of a collective politics? So I really want to see more balance between space for the individual, which is what I really am talking about here, an individual subjectivity. But notice that I tied it to the need for a more robust analysis of group-based processes and institutions, which I didn't talk about at all, correct? I just talked about group-based stuff. Because I think that's what we need right now. Other than that, people will individualize their problems and think it's just them, and there's no potential for participatory democracy other than assembling and accumulating all those individual votes without paying attention to the system. People will honestly think if we'll just get together and everyone who agrees with me, that's what's gonna happen. It doesn't work that way. This is why I talked about coalition politics and flexible solidarity at the end, to begin to have some tools for addressing that problem. We don't want to be out of whack by having the group suppressing individuality. That's kind of the question in some ways of a safe space. That can go too far in suppressing ideas. But we also don't want to think about the kind of individualism that occurs in advanced democracies, which is very much commodified individualism. We have an individualism where you're selling yourself all the time. This is what TikTok, don't they get on TikTok, those influencers and all those people, aren't they selling themselves as a brand and they're selling products and all that? We're sort of in a whole other place around individualism. It's not the sort of the noble person of the past who now is an individual who's no longer part of a community. It's really something that can be commodified and sold. So I think we have to be pretty careful about how we talk about that whole relationship. So I'm trying to really find ways to talk about it, stand on my own work, and then advance my own work around that issue, because I think that's an important issue. So thank you. I love that. I love that question, too. Keep asking me questions I love. Already I'm loving St. Andrews.
Audrey, there's one at the back and one at the front here. Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, hi, thank you so much. So I'm quite interested in what you said both in the beginning and kind of like here at the end about...
Not the middle?
Well, also the middle,
That's okay, that's okay.
But just of like my own particular interest in this idea of reimagining the future and reimagining, I guess, participatory democracy, but also, I mean, you mentioned the idea of scaling up and how that is really difficult when you go from small communities to larger communities to then maybe let's think big of like the global world. But I wonder what your insights or maybe where you see this going in terms of like actually scaling up participatory democracy.
You know, I don't know what the answer is, but I can tell you what I'm really encouraged by. I'm really encouraged by the fact that we now have communications networks where people can talk to each other. So you're not confined to the local. When I grew up, you could not get information. You know how frustrating that is to not get information. You can't get books to read. You don't know what's happening other places. And keeping people uninformed, especially uninformed about their own rights or uninformed about issues in the world, is the way you control them. But now, there is, if anything, it's almost the reverse. We have too much information, and we have to think about ways to critically engage it. So what I really like about what's happening now is I can know things about movements in the world. And I can know that my little local struggle on my little local block is big. I'll give you an example. Maybe 30 years ago, a gentleman, a colleague of mine by the name of Robert Bullock, was talking about environmental justice in Black communities. He was a lone voice at that time. He was talking about lead paint. He was talking about pollution from highways. He was talking about the location of power plants and pollutants near Black communities. And of course, we've since found out that it's indigenous communities and poor communities, et cetera, rural communities. But he was a lone voice. And he had no way of knowing, beyond going to conferences, I suppose, that there were many other people who cared about that. So what's happening to me is the speeding up of politicization around topics, particularly the globe. I can remember when the early reports of the scientists said the world is going to heat up and it will be terrible. And everyone said, ha, 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 science fiction. You know, like, let's just not look ahead. Let's not look to the future. Let us not plan for the future. Let's look to the past for what we want to do in the future, only to the past, which unfortunately had to do with making money and maintaining power. But we are now the future. I'm living in the future that people in the past refused to imagine. So what I really like about now is I think, and I'm going to talk about a generational shift that I think is quite significant. Age is a system of power. It's another one I write about. But young people are often not listened to in the past, but they are listened to now. So if you are in a generation where this is the existential issue of your life, the future of the planet, your individual life is tied to the future of the planet. You are no longer the lone voice in your community without the language of how to even think about this stuff. In fact, there's so many opportunities to network, meet, build online communities, build hybrid communities between the local organizing in actual time and space and the global community. And some of the most promising voices are people who are not afraid because they say, well, in the past, only the scientists could speak for us. Only the adults could speak for us. We will speak for ourselves. And I would argue that that is where a good deal of social change comes from. For my generation, it was quite a different set of issues, but it was the same vision of fighting for your future, followed by the backlash. I want to prepare you for the backlash. There's always going to be backlash, all right? But these visionary things are worth doing because what they say, this example of St. Joseph says, it's possible to do this. I mean, because often people will say it's impossible to do anything about this problem. We must just live with it and cope. Not at all. That is not the kind of leadership I want to see. Okay, so that's what I'd say about that. Is that helping you a smidge, a bit?
Yeah, it is.
Okay.
Good question, thank you. I think there was one at the back too. Yeah.
Thank you so much. My question is about just what you touched on in an example that you just gave, listening and the importance of tolerance of other reasonable perspectives. And I wanted to ask you, in light of what happened in 2021 at the University of Sussex, where Kathleen Stock was sacked for saying that women deserve to have a separate space in society for women, just like you said in your example. And I wanted to essentially ask you, do you think universities have a role to play in offering students a wide range of perspectives in order to let them come to their own decisions about what they believe in?
I really believe in free speech. And this would be something where I would differ dramatically in how we go about doing it from Elon Musk, all right? But who also believes in free speech. So a lot of people say that, right? The issue is, what institutional levers do you have? What institutional resources do you have to ensure free speech so that ideas really are heard? The flip side of, I'm very happy I'm an emeritus professor because I'm not teaching right now. I am not on campuses. I am not in the trenches. And I feel for those of you who are front row in the trenches, so because these are really difficult times to think about how to manage dissent and manage differences of opinion that are really quite offensive, and to help people hear those differences and say, that is not an institutional policy. What we are doing is we're providing space for multiple points of view, but that does not mean, if you are in a position of power and authority, that you can espouse views that are harmful. You cannot espouse hate speech. We have to be able to tell the difference between hate speech and unpopular speech. Now, I had to deal with this particular issue living in Cincinnati, Ohio, where I live, where years ago, the KKK, the Ku Klux Klan, which is a white terrorist organization in the United States who routinely lynched people over an extended period of time, wanted to put up a cross downtown as part of Christmas, because that is actually the symbol of the KKK, is claiming the cross. It's a really different interpretation of Christianity. Along with the little baby Jesus and all of that would go there, the shepherd boy and all the whole thing. It was going to be the creche, and the KKK said, but we have a point of view too. Well, the laws were such that they were absolutely right. They had the right to put that up. And I had to say, they have a right to do that. And I'm going to have to look at that. But how do we work differently to either change those rules to protect people who are genuinely harmed? It is a trauma for them to think about the KKK being part of the established curriculum in that way, or being on the town square in a major American city. We have to think about these thorny problems collaboratively and protect the institutions that we are in while we are doing that. Far too often people accuse the institutions of facilitating it or whatever. It's almost like dealing with the institutions like they are a mommy or a daddy. The family model, where you adopt somebody who's younger than you in the class, and then the mommy and daddy tell you what to do, and you're supposed to behave. So that whole model is one that infantilizes students in some ways and asks them to be subordinate. It teaches one to be subordinate. I really am interested in building a different kind of family model that certainly may have those same players in it, but that says we're gonna protect you until you, we're gonna protect you until you have the wherewithal to know how to appropriately share those views and affect power effectively to bring about change. There's a difference between, I'm gonna shut everything down and then telling someone else, you go fix it, all right? And saying, we want you to divest in stocks in South Africa, and we will be back at every single place where that decision is made in this institution until that is changed. Now that's working with allies or working with an institution. It's not being silenced and sort of put off in a corner. So the whole notion of institutions like universities are for everyone. They are not just for one group or one sample or one point of view. They're for everyone. It's in everyone's best interest if we hear multiple points of view. But we have to be respectful that some of those points of view are extremely difficult to hear. And we also have to be really careful not to mistake a point of view with an actual political action or an ideology. All right, it's a point of view. I don't know about my answer on that one, but I'm okay. Hard question.
I'm afraid we have time for one quick question. I think Audrey, just in the right there would be great. Thank you.
Hi, thank you so much for your talk. I don't know how quick this question will be, but sort of like thinking of like a hermeneutical sort of like immersive experience.
Okay, I'm gonna stop you right there because I can't hear you.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
You're gonna really have to like, big girl voice.
I can do
kind
that,
of thing.
I can do that. So sort of like taking like a hermeneutical immersive experience of understanding, how do you, in your thoughts, then like critically approach the bridging of ideas between like how you're thinking and then how like another person or text or whatever is thinking, and sort of like immersing yourself in their thoughts to sort of understand, but then also pulling back and trying to sort of develop a critique from that, I guess.
Let me tell you how I read. I think that might be what you're really asking me. This is really incredibly a group of, I want to ask you what class you're taking that you're practicing this language of the hermeneutical immersion in the text, right? Right? But I think the notion of how I read is really, I think it's very important to understand people's ideas on their own terms. I write books. I don't want people to read my books and just take chunks out and just make stuff up because they don't like it or they love it and they take those chunks out. Really trying to come to terms with the author, the author's intent, the author's history, the author's location, and why that case is being made. No matter how offensive the text is, I want the right to read that text. And the way I will read that text is critically. I'm not looking for, I'm predisposed to know what I'm not going to like. If I'm going to read Mein Kampf, I'm pretty much not going to like that. All right, but it's a book that I need to read. So I will read that and I will think, how is this argument constructed? Why is it effective? Who is likely to believe this and why? I'm sort of taking on the eye of me as a reader and saying, I'm going to develop a critical posture on everything I read, especially things I like. That's what's difficult. You can usually figure this out with things you don't like. But with things you like, and you get to the end of the book and you say, I just love that book, but I have no idea why. It's like a film. You get to the end and you think, what just happened to me? I watched this film and I loved it, but what happened to me with that? So I think it's up to us to just really be critically analytical of everything we read, but not just stop with responding to other people's arguments. What I tried to model today is, from that, building our own arguments that does justice to what's there. We don't just dismiss it because we don't know about it, but that also creatively puts together our own analyses that we share with other people. And our ideas get tested by how other people read them. Good classrooms will do that for you. You will have that opportunity to both share things. You'll feel safe enough, if you want to talk about safe spaces. Creating spaces where people can share things that they're just awkward about sharing. It would be really difficult for them to share. But the classroom space allows them to say things that they didn't know they thought until they're responding to someone else's experiences. That's the beauty of a good liberal arts education. And you are really fortunate to have one. Okay, that's praise for your teachers.
Professor Collins, we could go all night, and I'm sure we'd love to, but
no, we can't go all night. We can't.
Can't.
Professor Collins can't go all night. Maybe you can.
It's been 10 years since the Carnegie Lecture Series was founded, and what a way to celebrate it. Your ideas on intersectionality, how it can reshape our thinking around community, around participative democracy, and vice versa, I think this has been a master class in weaving together some really complex ideas. And I think that not only did people listen, but I can tell there's a bit of belief in the room as well. And being a professor in a business school, I noticed that you probably sold some books.
Well, you know, I'm not going to turn my nose up at that, but that's not why I do it. It should be really clear to you. You know, for me, it's a question of doing what I did up here, taking, like, flying without the net, you know, all the time. And then you decide, how do I write that up differently? How do I think about that? That's why I publish. It's
Absolutely.
for you. It's for you. It's not for me, because it's hard work.
Absolutely. Well, on behalf of all of us and the university, I heartfelt thanks for what has been an absolutely wonderful, provocative, humorous lecture. At the beginning, Professor Collins asked us if we're fun in St. Andrews, and we could clap politely, or we could do something a bit more robust. So let's go for the robust.